Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this June 30th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. They also play the show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. Thanks, First Amendment, for doing that. And also, if you can't get those shows, go to my long-standing website at arcticbeacon.com. And I've been talking about the Vatican-led New World Order for the past 10 years. Those of you who know me realize I've spent 7 years in Rome during the 80s as a reporter, so I got firsthand knowledge of what I talk about here on the show. Today, what I want to do, it's Thursday, and it's a holiday week. So what I want to do is push this show up to be my Friday show, because I'm taking tomorrow off and Monday, so I'll be back Tuesday. And usually on Friday I like to catch up on what we did during the week, even though it's Thursday, and talk about that. So let's do that. Well, there's really two things I want to do today. First, I want to read an email from a listener in Holland, and it talks about a whole bunch of subjects, and we'll get into that in a minute. And then after that, I want to discuss a story that was sent to me from the Epoch Times regarding the possibility that up to 1.5 million Chinese people have been killed for their organs. And I'm not talking about, one of their instruments in their homes. So we'll get to that story. But anyway, this story comes from Holland. And he says, "Dear Mr. Anthony, I've been following your radio interviews for 10 years now, and last Thursday you asked to write if folks disagreed with you on the subjects you were talking about, and I got your email. There's nothing that I disagree with you on, because you just give facts for folks to construct their own opinions." Thank you. Somebody figured it out, because I get blamed a lot of times for saying things, and I'm saying, listen, I'm just a messenger here. But I can give you some information, says my listener. Maybe there's some facts amongst things that you may find useful. And listen, let me tell you something. I found some of these things quite useful, and they may lead to a couple interviews. Attached, an image of September 11th, 2001. I found it somewhere online. If you don't know the image yet, I'm sure you will like it. The truth on 9/11 is, in my opinion, on 9/11 is what technically Dmitry Kalizov explained as a nuclear demolition. It is consistent with the observations of Dr. Judy Wood, where she observed things at 9/11 images with the results of the Hiroshima nuclear bombing. Her own conclusions, however, are absurd. Now, my listener here gets into a story about Justice Scalia that he apparently learned from a David Schroeder, and I'll explain who these two people, well, we know who Scalia is, but he says there's a strong possibility that Scalia was murdered by a 13-year-old boy prostitute, and this is according to David Schroeder. Schroeder is from Omaha, Nebraska. Now, here's an interesting thing. Schroeder is a supposed survivor of child abuse, and his story is grisly. And you have to go and Google this guy, Shurter, see if you believe what he says. And he said that Scalia was one of his main abusers. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stories that have to do with, remember all that going on with the Franklin cover-up and all of that pedophilia? Well, that's where he comes from. So, my friend here from Holland said that Schurter's website, where this was posted, is now censored. But here's the deal. They shut down his website, but the story currently is found at an Australian website. And here is that website, pedophilesdownunder.com, and you can get that /tag David Schurter. And he says, Pedophiles Down Under is run by a victim of Roman Catholic child abuse from Australia. Her name is Fiona Barnett, who also describes people being sacrificed in churches, Roman Catholic churches, but she recently said at her Facebook account that she did not do publications anymore. Boy, I wonder why. She knows very well as an insider that the Catholics are behind the pedophile network. Let's just say the hierarchy of the Vatican. Thanks to Fiona Barrett, the Cardinal of Australia had to flee Australia. If you can arrange an interview with her, you will get a very great program. Another one of programs that'll make your show even better. She claims to be raped by the father of Nicole Kidman. And you can find her at FionaBarrett.org. Okay? Now he gets back to Scalia here. He says Judge Scalia apparently was a pedophile. Has been published a lot. You can find them on different articles all over the place. Now, I may add something. Many of these stories come out, and of course, people on the mainstream will claim that people that bring these stories to you are crazy. They'll claim that Schroeder's crazy. Anything related to Scalia when you mention pedophile will be shot down. But let's look at this. Because of where Scalia was killed, where Scalia died naturally, supposedly, and all of the other things that make this death quite interesting and suspect. Now back to my emailer. He says, further, you missed out on many stories of Inquisition in the U.S. In 2008, another man, and I will get you his name, was put in jail in the same way that Tony Alamo was put in jail after being attacked severely with lies and false accusations. Children stolen from his friends and a Catholic judge. But unfortunately, those Christians in the USA, persecuted by the papists, often do not know that the Catholics are behind it. Now, he also, he's making, he's saying, Greg, there's a few people you've missed along the way that have been persecuted in America, similar to the way that Tony Alamo has been. Now, he also states, back to my emailer, Stephen Ben Denoon, okay, I think he does Israeli news, had also been following for years now. He has interesting publications. But the way USA is involved in the Ukraine and ISIS is not known by many Americans, but very well known by the Russians. I have been following Russian media, also at the web, and Russian propaganda and European propaganda tries to blame the Jews for what the Vatican organizes. Here's a movie of American politician, Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, supporting the protests in the Ukraine. Interesting. So email Victoria Nuland, and this has a lot to do with how we supported the rebels in the Ukraine. Ukraine has been in the Soviet Union, and the German espionage was taken over by the CIA. Together with Gladio Nazi groups in the Ukraine were supported. Left behind was that operation John Kerry also often visits the Ukraine. Western Ukraine is extremely Catholic because what was once invaded by Austria, but most of the country is Russian Orthodox or atheist. The war in the Ukraine is, as usual, a cover-up for the persecution of Baptist Protestants and Jews there. Russian Orthodoxy is so much destroyed by the communists, the papists, that the Patriarch of Moscow repaired diplomatic relations with the Vatican this year for the first time in 1,000 years. Okay. He says the governments of the world are controlled by the Vatican, and they use pedophilia as a way to bribe many people. I think this is a long enough letter for you now. Thank you for the good work you do, and best regards. Okay, that's from Holland. And he also mentioned, and let's look here real quick, a couple things. What I want to do is add a little bit about Scalia here. into this half hour, and then we'll get on to the Chinese story in the second half hour. Okay, I think what I'll do today, I just found this, and I'll get to Scalia's information in a minute, but Fiona Barnett has been whistleblowing about pedophilia in Australia for years, and there's an interview done with her on May 6th. It's only a month and a half ago, in 2016. So I thought we'd listen to this. It's a long interview, but I'll play some of it here for the next 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll move on to the other things. So here's that interview done by Tradcat Night Radio.
I have with me another special guest. We have with us Fiona Barnett, and she is Australia's most vocal and recognized whistleblower against VIP pedophilia. She was introduced to this criminal network via her Nazi war criminal grandparents. Fiona was trafficked internationally to prominent Americans who attended pedophilia parties held at Disneyland and the Bohemian Grove. Fiona's perpetrators included Anthony Kidman, who's Nicole Kidman's father, who suddenly died after authorities began investigating her formal complaint against him. Fiona has studied forensic psychology, art therapy, and more recently law. She's testified to the current Australian Child Abuse Royal Commission regarding her experiences of child trafficking, ritual abuse, and military mind control. Fiona addressed the national press late last year after an Australian senator publicly announced that a former prime minister was listed by the police as a VIP pedophile ring member. And so, as you know, at Tradcat Net, we've been trying to expose this network. Fiona and I were just talking real briefly concerning, the Catholic Church. It certainly is, that web, if you will, is now high up in the Vatican. It's all over the place in different denominations. We know it's at all levels in both our country, and I'm sure she'll get into Australia and the other countries she's familiar with. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Fiona. I'm going to just basically feed off of her, what she's saying. Again, she's taking a very strong stand, you can say, against this network, and it's something that we have to expose. We have to expose the dark, as our Lord said. So, Fiona, welcome aboard, and wherever you'd like to start, again, I'll just feed off of you. So, thank you for coming on and taking time out.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad we got the time right.
Yeah.
It's 11. It's 11:15 here in the evening, so it's quiet, and the mood's just right for talking about this sort of stuff, I think. Basically, I'll cover some basic ground. My introduction into this area was through my Nazi war criminal grandparents, as you said. My step-grandfather was Peter Holozak, or Holovchek, and he was from the east side of Poland, and he basically worked in the Lublin death camp over there, and I grew up hearing stories about how he liked to kill Jews for a living, and I used to think, well, who are the Jews and what did they do wrong? And his partner, Helen Holovchek, or Holozak, I still don't know if she's actually my blood relative. She really doesn't resemble our family very much at all, and certainly not morally. But she worked for the Gestapo, and she came from, Lithuania. And what people don't realise is that a lot of Nazi war criminals were not necessarily German. The ones who did a lot of dirty work were the Eastern Europeans, so the Polish and Hungarians and all that sort of group. And of course, they fled Australia when they knew the war was not going their way, and a lot of them posed as refugees, and they came to Australia, and they weren't vetted. But really, a lot of them, there's a fellow called Mark Aaron who wrote books and articles about this, about how Australia became a haven for Nazi war criminals. And the government knowingly allowed a lot of them into the country for some reason. So I know that America received quite a number of war criminals, and I know a number of them went to, work for, formed NASA and worked for your CIA, and it's the same here too. A lot of them assumed high up positions in Australia, and their offspring went on to, because they would maybe anglicise their surname, and they'd blend in, and they sort of became prominent in various positions in Australia. So a lot of them joined the police force and became doctors and so forth over here. And so Australia has subsequently become well infiltrated with the offspring of these Nazi war criminals. And what people have to realise is that Nazism is a religion. It's not just something that happened in Europe in the 30s and 40s. It's a religion, and it's based on Luciferianism. So it's based on a very ancient, Baal worship, basically. If you trace it right back, it goes back to Babylon. And in the end, these people when they came to Australia, they didn't stop practicing what they did over there. So if you can imagine, people were elevated to positions of authority and power in Europe if they were psychopaths. So, and they had years of being allowed to do whatever they wanted over there. So they would engage in child hunts. They would hunt children for fun. And, of course, a lot of sadistic pedophile types got into power as well. And pedophilia was actually part of their practices, and they learnt to, they had N equals 600 million subjects to play with, and no ethics committee to prevent them doing what they did. And in a very short amount of time, you can imagine how far their knowledge grew when they could just experiment on people. And people were dispensable like, mice, lab rats. And they perfected, as you know, Hitler searched the world for the mystery religions and all the practices and powers that you can find there, and gathered everything together, went to Tibet, went all over the world and brought everything back. And basically their knowledge of that sort of thing, and their knowledge of a human being's ability to dissociate under traumatic conditions manifested as the CIA projects in America. So at the end of the war, when a lot of the top scientists were split between Russia and America, and of course you had the MK program came out of that. And then MK Ultra came to Australia, and we've traced it back to at least around 1960. And so there were programs at Sydney University and universities in other states where they were, you can see that they're CIA funded. We've found the funding, the numbers, the project numbers, the funding sort of trail. And so there were experiments done in Australia to do with hypnosis and drugs, and basically manipulating behaviour and making people do what they wouldn't normally do under normal conditions, breaching their moral code and all this sort of thing. And so one of the doctors that was involved in all of that was Anthony Kidman. And he was I think he's a biochemist, and he's a psychologist. He was a registered psychologist up till he died. And a medical doctor who is a Nazi war doctor. We know he's a Nazi doctor because we've got copies of all his documents, got photographs of them. was Leonis Petraskas. Now, Leonis Petraskas was Lithuanian, so he knew my grandmother, Helen, and Helen and Peter, my grandparents, lived in Engadine, which is a suburb just south of Sydney, and it's a very interesting place. It's very significant, that area, because there's a lot of very vital landmarks there. You've got in Engadine, just around the corner from where my grandparents lived and my father grew up, is Engadine Boys Town, and that's Australia's first boys town. Now that is the site that has an underground tunnel system connected to it, and they have performed dreadful Luciferian rituals there for many years. And I'm second generation victim of Engadine Boys Town. My father was a victim of the crimes there too. And we've had people like a famous serial killer, Ivan Black, had something to do with Engadine Boys Town, and they've produced quite a number of psychopaths. And a lot of boys were murdered there. Like, so many boys went in and never came out.
Wow.
So, oh yeah, it was bad. So, I think you got a similar case over there. You've had a Boys Town case in America. And so, yeah, this is huge. And in fact, they had, in 2012, they commenced a covert police task force was assigned to Engadine Boys Town, and they were covertly investigating a pedophile ring there. And there have been previous convictions of pedophile priests and some female staff at the school there implicated in all this sort of thing in sexual abuse of students. Anyhow, so that's one thing you've got. And just down the road, just around the corner from there, you've got Engadine Medical Centre, and that was where Dr. Leonis Petraskas worked, and everybody at that medical centre was complicit. They were all involved, from the nurses to the doctors, in Luciferian ritual abuse. And they had, I think the locals had told me about years ago when I was a kid, there was a little private hospital there too, and one local was telling me about how when they went there one time, they saw a little 5-year-old girl in an ice bucket with all these tubes hanging out her. And, these are just normal folk just walking into a hospital situation going, what the heck's going on here? And they're all bizarre-looking experiments. Didn't look like any sort of normal practice, medical practice going on. So these are the sorts of things that are going on just around that was just a very short walk from my grandparents' place in Callister Avenue in that area, that suburb. And then just not far from there, down like walking distance really, a bit of a long walk through the bush, but that you could shortcut through the bush back then, is Holsworthy Army Base. And like, that's your main army barracks in Australia. And acres and acres of bushland as well. You've got lots and lots of huge national park right next to Holsworthy Army Barracks in Engadine, and lots of stuff would go, lots of rituals and murders would go on in the bushes. It was just so easy. No one could hear you scream in the bush. And then right across the road from Holsworthy Army Barracks was Lucas Heights Nuclear Reactor. Now,
okay, let's take a break here, and I'm going to come back and continue with this interview, and we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal, and a lot more stuff. So come back in 3 minutes on the other side of the break, and we'll continue with Fiona Barnett on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we are back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this June 30th, 2016 day on our calendar. And let's change on the fly here. I'll get to the Chinese story next week, and as well as talking a little bit more about the strange death of Justice Anton Scalia. But as I listened to this, I thought since she gave such a generalization in the opening 10 minutes or 14 minutes of this interview, I thought we'd go on a little farther today. It's always good to hear from people in Australia or other parts of the world regarding the same stories that we talk about here. Now, I want to be clear about this. When I worked in Rome, I was confronted by a girl who told me about satanic worshiping in the Vatican. At the time, I didn't believe her. And as time went on, I started looking at other stories regarding that same subject, and the more her story rung true to me. So I give people like this the benefit of the doubt, but I always preface it by saying you have to do research on this, because there's some over the years I've talked to many people, some telling the truth, some lying. So we always have to preface it that way. But I wanted you to listen to it. And the reason I do play these stories, because it's easy for a journalist just to say, it can't be true. I heard about this and talked to people in Rome that said this was going on. And that's enough for me to go ahead and give people like Fiona Barnett the benefit of the doubt. So let's see what she has to say and continue this interview.
I mean, this is unreal. There was a tunnel that joined Holsworthy. There was an underground building that I was familiar with, about 7 stories underground at Holsworthy, sort of south of the main entrance, sort of hidden from the regular, army folk. And it had tunnel system that joined up to Lucas Heights nuclear reactor. And Lucas Heights nuclear reactor went, I don't know, probably about the same, so there's many stories underground. And they used to make, what they made, the isotopes they used to make there, well, they used in their experiments on humans, and they were doing experiments on human behaviour, and they were using it for their scans and their brain, like doing cognitive assessments way back then. Yeah. It was less sophisticated as now, but they had the materials that they needed to do their weird scans. Anyhow, Lucas Heights nuclear reactor was designed by the same American company that designed and built Pine Gap, which is the American base in the middle of Australia, in the desert, underground, goes multi-stories underground that no Australian's allowed into unless we get permission to visit, by the Americans, which is bizarre in itself. But both Lucas Heights nuclear reactor and Pine Gap are CIA facilities. And in those facilities, and I'm a witness to this, they continued the MK Ultra experiments. That's where they did a lot of their that stuff. And everything the Nazis did was continued at those locations. So every single thing that everyone knows the Nazis were working on, that continued at Pine Gap and Lucas Heights nuclear reactors. So they were the two major facilities in Australia. And I believe there's I know there's an underground train system, tunnel, that somehow linked them up and linked up to Canberra and all these important places. And I don't know if the Americans built the tunnels as well. I'm not sure, but they're there.
So tell us, Fiona. I mean, just as best you can as a child. I mean, what were they doing to you? What were you seeing? I mean, I've heard not only aspects of your story, but others who have been victims. Coming out. I personally, I work with women in the escorting prostitution area, and of course I hear stories of trafficking. I hear names being passed of government officials. I hear people being trapped, like grown women being trapped in cages, just being used for sexual purpose. I mean, it gets really bizarre. I want you to kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when you talk about prostitution and trafficking, I'm doing a couple of law subjects at the moment, just because, my life's not busy enough. And I just did a big project big essay on and study on prostitution and whether it should be legalised. And I didn't realise, but when I looked at the research and particularly the Swedish model, in Sweden they introduced legislation where they made it legal for women to sell sex, but they made it illegal for men or anyone else to buy sex, and illegal to pimp. And they went from these phenomenal figures, tens of thousands of prostitutes, to virtually none. And they completely ruled out all international trafficking by introducing these laws, and they treated the prostitutes as victims of crime. And what they discovered was, at least 90% of the women were victims of child sexual abuse, and prostitution was just a continuation. And the average age and they did studies all around the world, including Australia, and they found that the average age that somebody entered prostitution was age 12. Yeah. And so, really, my conclusion is prostitution is trafficking. It doesn't matter what age the person is, it is trafficking, and it results in slavery. And there's nothing about autonomy or women's rights in it. It's not. It is human trafficking. And they found that if they legalised trafficking, if they legalised prostitution, say when they did it in Victoria some years ago, it just increased the crime and increased the government's involvement in criminal activity. So what you had was all these politicians and so forth involved. So what the research showed was that everywhere you've got prostitution, you've got trafficking, you've got child trafficking. It's highly correlated with child prostitution and child trafficking. And it's highly correlated with the involvement of politicians and government corruption. So the whole study told me what I witnessed as a child, which is it's all linked. And so what I saw as a child, basically, from my earliest memory, I was left at my grandparents' place. You know, my mother had no concept of this. She actually was raised, you know, it was a very normal childhood. She was raised Catholic. She went to a little small convent school, and you know, she had a pretty good upbringing up in Queensland. And you know, she was blind to all of this, and she you know, thought she was leaving me with my doting grandparents, and she had no concept of any of this. So I was left there from a very young age. From the youngest age was, I think I wasn't even 2 when my brother was born, and he was very ill, and my dad actually dumped me at the grandparents so that he could work, and my mum was in the hospital for weeks and weeks, and so that's when the abuse really started over there. And so I was abused by my step-grandfather, but what people got to understand is that it's always a bit of a red herring. With victims of the higher stuff, the ritual abuse and the big trafficking to the VIPs, they always have some family member or someone close to the family that abuses the child, so that's what it can be blamed on later on. So if they go into therapy or whatever, the doctors and nurses go, oh, well, you know, she was abused by her grandfather, and everything else, all the other stuff she talks about, well, that's just a metaphor for what really happened, you know.
Yeah.
So, and it's by design they do that. They're wonderful disinformation agents. So I was abused, and my earliest memory of being involved with people outside of my grandparents' sort of little world and their friends was of Anthony Kidman. And I had a flashback, and a flashback is when well, I guess the neural pathways in your brain reconnect through healing and therapy and integration, and you know, your memories of actually, when you dissociate, your memories are actually being disconnected, and you've actually got neural pathways that have been cut, and integration reconnects those, and integration may involve, you know, swimming and doing things, bilateral actions that actually cause a physical rejoining in your brain, and then you get these flashbacks, and you know, they're not very pleasant. You can get sensory flashbacks. So I've had flashbacks of being electrocuted. I've woken up in the middle of the night screaming my head off, because there's no difference between being electrocuted and a flashback of being electrocuted. But I've had visual flashbacks where what I'm looking at, the normal room, will completely change, and it's like having a TV screen right up in front of you, and you're seeing what you're seeing now is what you see in the flashback, only it's 30 years old or 40 years old, the material, and it's an absolute flash, and it's so clear. I mean, you might as well be there. It's just like someone flicked the TV channel. And I had a flashback of being in Anthony Kidman's office at age 3, and being in some kind of, like a dentist chair in a city office, and he was, you know, torturing me and, you know, sexually assaulting me and all this sort of stuff. So then I had, so Kidman was involved. Kidman was actually at university with Dr. Leonis Petrauskas, the Nazi doctor at Sydney University, at exactly the same time, because Petrauskas updated some of his qualifications in Australia, and they were chummy. And so how it worked was, you know, there was my grandparents. They were involved in a pedo ring that, you know, involved a lot of Nazi war criminals and their offspring. They passed, and then Leonis Petrauskas was in that ring. Leonis Petrauskas was in charge of Engadine Boys Town. He was the head, well, what do you call him? Well, high priest, I suppose, in that Luciferian world. And he passed me on to Anthony Kidman, and then at age 5, I met John Gittinger. Now, John Gittinger was the head of psychology within the CIA MKUltra program, and he was an evil genius, and he wrote the personality assessment system. He was able to take psychology tests that weren't really designed to do what he could do with them. Things like the Wechsler intelligence tests, and he was just amazing. He could take some of those Wechsler results and really actually predict behaviour and present a very thorough psychological profile of that person, their personality. And so his job was, and he was a pedophile. These people are all pedophiles.
Yeah.
He basically said, I was brought to him at age 5. I was put up as a candidate for the proper MK Ultra program, and so Kidman had already done a few preliminary things, and I was subjected to a battery of tests at Holmesworthy Army Base in the underground facility there, and Lucas Heights nuclear reactor, some stuff happened there. And basically I was, around this time I was also under the care and tuition of what they call a Grand Dame. A Grand Dame is a female. I knew her as Veronica. Don't even know if that's her real name because they changed names. These people, so Leonis Petrascus, I was made to call Dr. Mark. That was, to try and confuse everything. If I told anyone, oh, Dr. Mark hurt me, no one would know who the heck I was talking about. So I was presented to Gittinger, and he put me through a battery of tests. I was put through physical endurance tests. I was hooked up to machines. I was given full medical assessments. He thoroughly psychologically assessed me. He assessed my IQ, my personality, creativity. They had tests there that they still haven't even released. They had military grade technology, so you can imagine the tests that they had back then compared to what the public knew about. So, and some of the tests I recognise. I was tested on the Stanford Binet LM, which had the best, and it's still to this day is really probably hasn't been surpassed in terms of its ability to map cognitive ability. So, especially visual spatial processing ability, and then the Wechsler block design test. I remember that one really well. I blitzed especially the visual spatial component of the test, and I guess I was what they call a package deal. I had, you can get kids who are high IQ, but they also, what you need is, they wanted me to be Aryan, so for whatever reason they were continuing with the Nazi thing of, I was very blonde back then. I was white blonde, and I had very white skin back then, and I had big blue eyes, and I was a very attractive child back then, so, I was flawless. Physically, I was super strong, incredibly fit, and I, even up until, what did I do? I had an ectopic pregnancy in between my children, and I lost probably 50% of my strength, but up until then, I was as strong as, a weak male. And there was one time when I was training as a parole officer, and the head of the fellow who trained the prison guards in Sydney, he challenged me to a wrestle, and I won. I had him in a headlock, and he said, "You got me," and he gave in. So I was very strong, and so I was like an athlete, and that's what they wanted. And I had phenomenal coordination, and I was good at shooting when I was young, and archery, and all this sort of stuff. Everything they want in a Manchurian candidate, and so they picked me for their dastardly, experiments and methods, and I was put through the MK Ultra training, and that consisted of things like, well, at age 6 I had the full military training on site at Holsworthy, and I was trained by a Chan. He was an Asian guy with an Asian accent in Australian uniform, and he was a sadistic mongrel, and I was trained with a bunch of kids that they then murdered in front of me, and that's part of the process to forced dissociation. I was drugged, I was raped, I was assaulted repeatedly. I was subjected to virtual reality programming, so back then no one knew what that was, so I didn't know what the hell it was. I thought it was real. Only know as an adult when virtual reality came out in mainstream public, I knew what it was that I'd experienced. I was thrown in, it resembles things that you see in some films, Hollywood films, and, that put me in this, subject me to sensory deprivation, all sorts of horrible experiments, and I saw kids in cages, kids who'd never seen daylight. I saw, they breed children in captivity for not just prostitution and so forth, but for just so they're dispensable. So they would, as Gideon said to me one time, you should, he was electrocuting me. There was a team of people there electrocuting me with cattle prods, and he said, you should be, what did he say? I've written it down in the artwork I did of it. You should be proud or something. He says, you're a national asset, and he used to tell me about how many millions of dollars I cost the government and this sort of thing, and then they would murder all these kids that sacrifice these kids' lives.
So
for the benefit of,
how would they actually choose, like, who lives, who dies? I mean,
well, these kids don't exist. They didn't have birth certificates or names. Some of them didn't even have names. They might have numbers or whatever. They were nobodies. So they were bred for that purpose. They have breeders for this stuff.
okay.
And the breeders are in captivity and have no choice. They, sometimes they're second, third generation, these breeders who are nobodies in society.
Okay.
And they don't even exist. They don't have a birth certificate number. So somebody like me, I was bloodline. So whatever they also did testing on my DNA and all that stuff, and they could do that back then compared to what they tell you now. So they did all the blood stuff, and they were, whatever they found, they liked it, and so that was something they were into. And but also, look, I was a real person, and I had real parents, and I had a mother who would miss me if I went, and you don't. I'm not. I'm not like junk food, I'm was considered one of the, I don't know, I think Fritz Springmeier said there was about 300 bloodlines below the major ones, what is it, 12 or something, 12 or 13 bloodlines, and there's about 300 below that, so obviously I was one of those, so, and for some reason they value those, and I think it's because high IQ runs through those bloodlines, and also if they're dissociated, and you've got, and what they really want in kids is for their projects, like their elite projects, they want kids who have the visual spatial processing capacity, because they're the ones who split better, they're the ones who visualize better when they're, because part of the programming and the MK Ultra process, it involves getting the child to visualize. So they'll say, if they want layers of programming, then they'll say, imagine something that's got layers in it, and it works best when the child comes up with the idea. And so they want creative kids, and then it works best when the child visualises and can picture things. So, a percentage of the population think in pictures, and the rest think in words. And if you are high IQ and have a strong visual spatial processing ability, and you think in pictures, well, you're going to think in movies. If you tell me a story, I make a movie out of it in my head, and also they're the ones, like I used to have photographic memory, and so we're the ones with photographic memory ability. So if you want to create a spy, the best spy, a human tape recorder, if someone's got photographic memory, doesn't have to write anything down or use any equipment. I used to have a photographic memory for dialogue. I mean, I could come in and, I could write down exactly what went on in the conversation, and I knew where the punctuation was, and consistently would say where the punctuation was, the inflection in the voice, and this sort of thing. And so that's what they're after. They're after, and it's people with visual spatial processing ability that are very good snipers. They make the best snipers. Very good at driving a vehicle, reversing a vehicle, and they're very, they're the traits that Gideon was after. is the visual spatial processing ability. So, translates into everything you want in a Manchurian candidate. So, so that's what they did, and then part of that processing ability, part of that process of programming, they would basically get you to dissociate so that you would start with what's like a clean slate in your mind that has no memory. They would open up a part of your brain, and they'd physically split your brain. That's what people don't realise. They think it's this, ethereal, abstract thing, but it's a physical process, and they split your brain. So when I went through the integration process, and I had to experience all of this stuff again, I actually got severe vertigo. Because when I was a kid, I was experiencing the opposite, the reverse to what they did. So they would spin me. They'd put me in equipment designed to train military, to withstand G-force and stuff. And that'd spin me to my brain split and put me into all these contractions until you're just so sick. And so, so they force this dissociation. So the brain has a natural ability to dissociate when you're traumatized. So, for example, if you have a car accident, go through the front windscreen, your brain is designed to switch off so that you don't remember going through the windscreen. You might remember before the accident, you might remember afterwards in the ambulance, but the brain just, is designed so that you don't remember that really bad bit going through the windscreen, because that's just too much.
Okay, I've got to take
You can't handle that. So what the Nazis did, they took this natural ability of the brains.
Well, we ran out of time. I'll finish this up next week on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.